When I acquired my Famicom earlier this year, one of the games that came with it was Mario Brothers, the Nintendo classic which is arguably the first in the massively popular Mario series. Which, honestly, if you aren't familiar with in some capacity, I have to wonder how you even got here because I didn't know they had the internet in the 1800s. But I digress. Playing it reminded me that when I was younger, I actually played a version of this game for the Atari 2600, which then reminded me that there were a few other Nintendo games for that system. You see, before the days of the Nintendo NES, they would license the rights to producing their games to various companies such as Atari, Coleco, and even Parker Brothers of Monopoly fame. As far as the Atari VCS and 2600 versions go, Coleco developed the slight majority of them, namely Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr. But Atari would later gain the rights to distribute these games under their name, as well as developing their version of Mario Brothers. Parker Brothers got the proverbial short end of the stick, I suppose, because they got the rights to port the awesome yet severely less popular Popeye. Today I'll be looking at all four of these, because if I didn't, this background information might seem a little random and pointless, wouldn't it? Let's take a look. First up we have Donkey Kong. The concept of this one is about as basic as it gets. You maneuver your character at the bottom of the screen to the top where your girlfriend Pauline is without dying. To do so you must climb ladders and avoid objects, which are supposedly barrels, which are being tossed at you by the titular ape. Despite being so straightforward though, this port has some issues, namely how your character controls. He walks left and right well enough, I suppose, and jumps without problem, sure, but when it comes to climbing ladders, there's a really weird delay that occurs, or sometimes he won't climb the ladder at all. This is sometimes due to not being lined up with the very specific hitbox of the ladder, but sometimes it seems to be totally random. This gets especially bad in the second level, where all you're doing is really climbing up and down ladders. The second control problem comes with jumping. While jumping itself is no pain, the people who ported it to the Atari added a new restriction in order to clear the barrels. That is, you have to run and jump over them. If you try to stand still and jump over one, you will die. In the more minor complaints section, the sounds are just awful. Perhaps the sound themselves are passable, but since they are constantly being played, it quickly becomes irritating. But this is why mute buttons exist, right? Also, the game has only 2 levels on an infinite loop, so it gets rather stale rather quickly. But I suppose for the time, and given the hardware limitations, this is to be somewhat expected. For that same reason, I'm not going to complain about the graphics. If anything, there's something oddly endearing about how Donkey Kong looks like the gingerbread man, Pauline looks like a fish, the aforementioned barrels look like cookies, and your mustache changes color depending on the situation. It's silly, yes, but that's one of the best parts about games of this era. Next, let's take a look at its sequel, Donkey Kong Jr. So the idea of getting to the top of the screen while dodging objects is still present, but with some new stuff thrown in. First of all, you are now playing as Donkey Kong's titular son on a mission to rescue your father from Mario. There's also a larger focus on climbing, which luckily works much better in this game than it does in its predecessor. As another addition, there are more pieces of musical-ish beeps and boops, such as Bach's Toccata Fugue in D minor, and that little ditty that plays in the arcade game. To my dismay, though, there are also some more annoying sounds, and these are even worse than the ones that are found in Donkey Kong. Where those sounds alone weren't totally awful, these definitely are. Most of the controls are better, at least. It seems, well, besides jumping that is, which is now very jarring and imprecise in an indescribable way. You just have to play it for yourself, I suppose. There are 3 levels in this game, which, while an awesome improvement over Donkey Kong, are hilariously out of order. So, in the second level, when you free your father, he's captured again in the third. And that's really all I have to say about Donkey Kong Jr. Yeah. Next, Popeye. Graphically, this one may have made the worst transition to the Atari, but as far as gameplay goes, it made the most decently average. The goal, like in the arcade version, is to collect the falling objects which olive oil drops from the top of the screen. Hearts in the first level, music notes in the second level, and what I'm guessing are letters in the third level. I say that because I've actually never made it that far due to the game's now totally broken difficulty, caused by a mixture of spotty controls, extraordinarily aggressive AI, and some new hazards such as blocks randomly flying at you from the sides of the screen, without warning. It's hard to block these too because your attack doesn't leave your rectangular hitbox. It takes very good timing and reflexes. Luckily, you now have a new ability to deal with these challenges. Where in the arcade game, eating spinach and punching Brutus would only knock him off the screen and stun him for a while, here it temporarily phases him out of existence. Sarcasm aside though, out of the four, I probably had the most fun with this one because its raw difficulty is something that has always appealed to me. But as is a theme with these games so far, there are much better ports which I own. Finally, we have the game that inspired this video, Mario Brothers. And first of all, this game is interesting for having a title screen, which while today is nothing big at all, on the Atari this was rather uncommon. Strangely from here though, there doesn't seem to be a reliable way to actually start the game. As far as I can tell, it pretty much starts at total random. When it does start though, you'll notice that the graphics look pretty good, at least in comparison to the other games we've seen so far, and it still has the benefit of allowing you to change the color of your mustache. But how does the gameplay fare? Well, it is arguably the closest to the arcade version. Everything from that game is here in some sense. You still jump underneath enemies to stun them and bump into them to defeat them. There are also bonus levels where you attempt to collect all the coins on the screen in order to get an extra life, though I honestly thought this impossible due to the weird controls. Now granted, the arcade controls take a long time to get used to, but these are bad for a different reason. Mario will only jump straight up or at 45-degree angles, which makes everything super awkward. Also, if you are one of those people like me who hold down the fire button until you need to use it again, you will find yourself frozen in place because while that button is suppressed, you cannot move. Strange. Other than that, there is only one other problem I have with the game, and that involves the crab enemies. Their quirk is that you have to hit them twice to be able to flip them over. But in this version, if they pass through the pipe, they'll come back reset, so this actually adds a whole new dimension of difficulty to the game. So, the verdict. Well, generally this is my advice with all Atari ports. Unless you are a collector or a historian, or like me, you just have a fascination with strange games, you should probably pass on these. There are definitely far better ways to experience these games. Rather inexpensively, I might add. I personally recommend the NES and Famicom versions, or the arcade version if you're lucky enough to live near an arcade. And that's all I have for today. See you next time on Mike the Gamer Guy.